A blind street performer plays his heart out on a rainy sidewalk, ignored, unseen, unheard. But when one little girl stops to listen, everything changes. What the crowd sees next shocks them to their core, and by the time his secret is revealed, the world is never the same again. The city moved like it always did, restless, loud, indifferent. Crowds pushed past the sidewalk, umbrellas clicking open in the light rain. Phones glued to ears, eyes fixed on nothing. And in the middle of that busy street, barely noticed, sat an old man with a weather-worn face and no eyes. A blindfold covered his eyes, not for pity, but to shut out the world that had already shut him out. He held a violin close to his heart like it was the only thing left that still spoke to him. And maybe it was, because every time he raised the bow, it wasn't music that came out, it was memory. He played, not for the crowd, not for fame, not even for survival. He played because the notes were his voice, the only language he could still use to remember the face of his daughter. Her name was Lila. She was 7 when she died. The moment he lost her, something inside him shattered so violently, he hadn't spoken since. Not a word, not even a whisper, just music. People passed him every day. Sometimes someone would drop a coin. Sometimes they'd take a video. But most days he was just part of the noise. Until today. Across the street, a little girl stopped. She couldn't have been older than 10. Wet shoes, tattered sweater, holding a plastic bag over her head for cover. Her eyes were fixed on the man, like she heard something no one else could. She crossed the road, slowly, as if being pulled. She stood in front of him, silent. He kept playing, but something shifted. His fingers, though blind, noticed her shadow. And somehow he changed the melody, just slightly. The tone softened, became lighter, like spring breaking through a snowstorm. And the girl, she started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, heavy tears that fell down her cheeks like they'd been waiting for years to be seen. A woman in a suit walked past, glanced at the girl, and rolled her eyes. A man on a scooter yelled, "Move, kid," but she didn't. She stood still, barefoot now. She'd taken her shoes off without even realizing it. And that's when it happened. A small crowd gathered. Not because they understood what was happening, but because they felt it. The violin cried through the city, louder than the noise, deeper than the traffic. It wasn't just music anymore. It was grief. It was love. It was truth. A teenage boy lifted his phone to record. But the girl turned and said, "Please don't. Just listen." And for some reason, the boy lowered his phone. Silence. Then applause. A few people clapped awkwardly. Someone dropped a $5 bill. Another walked away with a shake of their head. But the girl? She stepped forward and took something from her pocket. A folded photo. Rain had soaked the edges. She placed it on the violin case. The blind man kept playing, but his fingers trembled. He knew that touch. He remembered that scent. And when the last note played, he reached forward, slow, unsure, and his hands landed on the photo. He held it to his chest. And then, with a shaky voice that cracked like dry wood, he whispered, "Lila." Gasps. Someone in the crowd dropped their coffee. The girl stood frozen. She looked nothing like his daughter. Not really. But grief doesn't recognize faces. It only recognizes soul prints. I'm not Lila, the girl said softly, but I think I was meant to find you. The blind man leaned forward. "What's your name?" "Sophie." And then silence again, until, from the back of the crowd, a voice rose. A woman, mid-40s, short hair, umbrella closed. She looked pale, shaken. She stared at the violinist like she'd seen a ghost. "Sophie," she called. The girl turned. "Mom." The crowd parted. The woman ran forward and wrapped Sophie in her arms like she'd lost her forever. "I told you not to run off. I was so scared. I was just listening," Sophie said. He plays like he's remembering someone." The woman looked at the man. Their eyes met, or would have, if his had worked. But he felt her stare. And she felt something else. Recognition. She looked down at the photo in his hands. That's not possible. The man tilted his head. You knew Lila? The woman's hands trembled. She knelt beside him. I was her nurse. At St. Clair's. She used to draw you every day. But you never came. She said you stopped loving her. The violinist's face collapsed. I didn't stop. I couldn't bear to see her go. The woman placed a hand on his shoulder. She forgave you. Every single day. She said the music would find you again. Sophie looked up, eyes wide. Then that's why I came. The rain had stopped. No one noticed when. The street was still. No one moved. Even time itself seemed to be holding its breath. And then, slowly, a man from the crowd began clapping. Then another. Then more. Not out of performance, but out of reverence. A blind man, a lost girl, a forgotten memory, and a moment that stitched them all together like fate had been planning it all along. And just when everyone thought it was over, the violinist did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled, but behind that smile was something deeper. A truth. A secret he had buried for 2 decades. And that secret was about to change everything. The crowd slowly faded. But the moment didn't. Even as people walked away, glancing back over their shoulders, something invisible had been left behind. A thread. Delicate, powerful, binding. The blind musician sat in silence now, violin resting against his knee. Sophie stayed close, sitting beside him like they'd known each other forever. Her mother stood just behind her, arms crossed, eyes glassy. But it was the photo that no one could stop looking at. Old, faded. A child's drawing of a man holding a violin, surrounded by music notes and a heart. At the bottom, in uneven pink crayon, one word was written. Daddy. The old man, his name was Elias, held it like it was the last living piece of a daughter he never got to say goodbye to. She really drew this for me, he whispered. Sophie's mother nodded. Every single day. She waited for you till the end. Elias lowered his head, voice cracking. I should have gone. I should have been there. But Sophie interrupted gently. Maybe you were always meant to meet someone who would remind you. Elias turned toward the sound of her voice. And that someone is you? Sophie nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Maybe not me. Maybe her. Maybe both. Just then, a man approached from across the square. Mid-30s, expensive coat, holding a DSLR camera. I saw what happened, he said, almost breathless. I caught part of it on film. I'm a documentarian. Please, would you let me interview you? Elias shook his head, immediately shrinking. No cameras. No stories. That's not why I play. But Sophie reached out, touched his hand. Maybe this story isn't just yours anymore. The filmmaker crouched. The world needs to hear this. Not for views. For healing. Elias hesitated. Then, with a sigh that carried 20 years of silence, he whispered, Not here. Not like this. Sophie's mother, still wary, stepped forward. There's a small cafe down the block. It's quiet. So they walked together. An odd trio. A blind man holding onto a stranger's shoulder. A little girl guiding his steps. A mother wondering how they'd all ended up here. Inside the cafe, rain tapping gently against the glass, Elias finally began to speak. I lost Lila to cancer. She was 7. My wife had already left us. It was just me and her. And when the doctor told me we had 6 months, I didn't believe it. I refused to. I kept playing gigs, thinking money would save her. By the time I realized time was more valuable than money, he swallowed hard. It was too late. I missed her last breath. Silence. Sophie's eyes filled again. Her small hands clenched under the table. I was 8 when my dad left, she whispered. No reason. Just disappeared. My mom did everything, but I always wondered what it felt like to be seen by a father. Elias turned toward her voice, his jaw tightening. And yet you stayed. You listened to me play like I mattered. Because you did, she said. Even if you didn't know it. The filmmaker was frozen. His camera lay untouched on the table. This wasn't a documentary anymore. This was sacred ground. Then Sophie asked the question no one expected. Why did you cover your eyes? Elias paused. I went blind 3 years ago. Diabetes. At first, I wore the blindfold because people stared. Then, I wore it because I didn't want to see a world that had forgotten my daughter. A long pause. And then today, someone reminded me she was never gone. Not really. Sophie smiled faintly. Maybe she sent me. Sophie's mom, who had stayed silent for most of it, suddenly looked down and whispered. She used to say something in the hospital. Right before falling asleep, everyone turned toward her. She'd say, Daddy doesn't need to find me. He just needs to find his song. Elias's hands began to tremble. I've been trying to write that song for 20 years, he said, tears falling behind the blindfold. And he inhaled. I never finished it, until today. He stood up slowly, pulling the violin case closer. I don't know if I can play it exactly, but I can feel it. Would you listen? Sophie nodded instantly, and in that quiet cafe, surrounded by nothing but coffee steam and heartbeats, Elias raised his bow. The music that followed didn't feel like music at all. It felt like Lila. It wasn't perfect. Notes shook. Fingers slipped. But no one noticed. Because somewhere in those notes was a goodbye. A rebirth. A reunion across time. Sophie wept silently. Her mom held her close. The filmmaker forgot to breathe. And when Elias finished, the cafe was still. He smiled. I think she heard it. Just then, the cafe owner, an old woman with silver hair, stepped forward. I don't know who you are, she said, but I lost my son 3 years ago. And I haven't cried since. But today, I did. She placed a folded napkin in front of him. On it were 3 words. You brought him back. Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a tiny wooden locket. My grandma gave me this. She said it opens when your heart knows who it's meant for. She handed it to Elias. He touched it and it clicked open. Inside was a tiny carving. A violin. And below it 2 names. Lila.
Sophie.
He gasped. Where did you get this? I don't know, Sophie said honestly. But I always felt like it wasn't mine alone. Elias held the locket tight and whispered, I think the world just told me. I'm not alone either. The filmmaker finally picked up his camera. I need to ask, can I share this moment? Elias paused, then nodded. But tell them this isn't a story about a blind man who played music. Then what is it about? The man asked. Elias looked toward the sound of Sophie's breathing and said, it's about a little girl who reminded a broken father how to see again. And that's when the cafe doors swung open. A man walked in, wearing an old leather jacket, soaked from the rain. And when he saw Sophie, his face went pale, his lips parted, and he said the words no one expected. Sophie, is that really you? The cafe seemed to freeze in time. Sophie turned around slowly. Her breath caught in her throat. The man stood just inside the doorway, dripping wet, eyes wide with disbelief. His voice trembled as he said again, Sophie, it's me. Her mother stood up, so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her face went pale. Ethan. The name fell from her lips like a memory she'd tried to bury. The man nodded, guilt painting every inch of his face. I didn't come here for you. I came because I heard the music outside. It felt like something was pulling me here. Sophie stared at him, this ghost who had once been her father. You left us, she whispered. I know, he said, stepping forward. And I regret it every single day. Then why didn't you come back? Her voice broke, small but sharp. He looked at the floor. I was ashamed. I thought maybe you'd be better off without me. Sophie's mother, her voice colder now, stepped between them. You thought wrong. But Sophie didn't move. She looked between Elias, the blind violinist who'd given her comfort without ever seeing her face, and this man, her real father, standing like a stranger in front of her. The room was thick with silence, and then Elias spoke. You knew her, he asked softly. Ethan nodded. I was there when she was born. I held her the first night. I used to sing to her when she cried. Sophie blinked fast. But you didn't stay. I didn't know how to be a father, Ethan whispered. And then Elias said something that felt like a thunderclap in the quiet. I didn't know either. And when I finally tried, it was already too late. Everyone looked at him. He continued, slowly, voice heavy with years of guilt. We both failed. You walked away before she needed you. I disappeared while mine was dying. But today, this little girl gave me a second chance to feel something I thought I lost forever. Sophie sat back down. Her eyes were tired now, not just from crying, but from feeling too much for one day. You both made mistakes, she said, voice trembling. But if I keep hating you, then I become just another broken piece in your story. Her mother gasped softly. Ethan took a step closer. Can I sit with you? Sophie hesitated, then nodded. But before he could move, Elias raised a hand. One condition, he said. You listen. You sit and listen to something first. Ethan paused. What is it? My daughter's final song, Elias said. The one she waited her whole life for. The one that came too late. Elias lifted his violin again. And this time, he didn't just play. He poured everything into the strings, the grief, the years of silence, the longing, the guilt, and the sudden flicker of something he hadn't felt in decades, forgiveness. The music climbed like a rising sun over cold hills, weaving through notes that whispered her name, Lila. Sophie closed her eyes and leaned against her mom's shoulder. Ethan sat across from her, hands folded, head bowed. The song didn't ask for tears, it summoned them. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And sometimes, that's all the heart needs. When the last note faded, Elias lowered his bow slowly. I played that once, years ago, in a hospital hallway. I didn't go in. I just stood behind the wall and played. I thought she wouldn't know I was there. Sophie's mom looked up sharply. That was you? She said she heard her daddy play once. But I thought she imagined it. She didn't, Elias whispered. The room sat in silence. Then Sophie stood up. She reached into her little backpack again and took out a folded envelope. I wrote a letter last year, she said, to my dad. I never sent it. I didn't even know where he was. But I think I want to read it now. Everyone held their breath. She unfolded it slowly, voice shaky but brave. Dear Dad, I don't know where you are. I used to think you'd come back on my birthday. Then I thought maybe you died. But I kept hoping because moms can love you forever. But it's different when your dad looks at you and says you're enough. Sophie paused. Tears slipped down Ethan's face. She continued. I want to hate you. But I also want to know what your voice sounds like now. I wonder if you ever hear my laugh in your dreams. I wonder if you cry sometimes when no one's looking. Because I do. She folded the paper slowly. And now that you're here, maybe you can write me back. Ethan stood slowly, voice shaking. I don't deserve to, but if you'll let me try. Sophie walked toward him. One step, then another. Then she opened her arms and hugged him. The entire cafe exhaled. Even Elias smiled, not because his pain was gone, but because he finally saw what healing looked like. A little girl, with the courage to forgive both the ghosts of her past and the ones still living. Later that evening, as the rain returned, the filmmaker uploaded the footage. He didn't edit it. He didn't add music. He just titled it, The Day a Blind Man Helped a Girl See Her Father Again. Within hours, the video went viral. Millions watched. And somewhere in the middle of it all, two broken fathers and a brave little girl gave the world something it hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And Elias? He kept playing. Every day. Same street corner. But now, Sophie came too. Sometimes she sang. Sometimes she just sat beside him, holding a sign that read, You don't have to be seen to be heard. And every so often people stopped, listened, cried. Not because the music was perfect, but because they knew, just for a moment, they were hearing someone's heart. Not a performance, a confession. And in a world so noisy, that kind of silence was the loudest thing of all. True talent has no limits, John, not age, not wealth, not even blindness. What truly touches hearts isn't perfection, but authenticity. The blind boy didn't just play music. He played pain, hope, and love with every note. And in a world obsessed with fame and filters, sometimes the purest souls, the quietest hearts, change everything. Never underestimate someone just because they look broken. They might be the very miracle you've been waiting for.